Welcome to Real American Variety. The story I am about to tell you should shock you. I'm going to tell you the story of what has been considered the single bloodiest day in American political history. Now, I found this video by accident. I was riding my bike, and when I do, I often listen to YouTube videos, and I can't really control what comes up next, so I just listen to whatever comes up in the queue. And a lot of times it's videos I otherwise would not have chosen. I would not have chosen this video. It was from MSNBC, and it was an attack article on Ron DeSantis and his new African American history curriculum in Florida.
Governor DeSantis is attempting to rescue his struggling presidential campaign by spotlighting his latest crusade against Black history. First, Florida rejected the curriculum for AP African American Studies. Then, the Board of Education approved new standards for teaching Black history, including mandating lessons on the personal benefit of slavery and requiring that lessons on certain race massacres include acts of violence perpetrated against and by African Americans. So once again, we went back to Florida, traveling to the small town of Ocoee, 12 miles west of Orlando, where the town's own history of anti-Black violence and its residents' ability to learn about it, where that is all under threat.
The Ocoee Massacre was basically like a whole bunch of Black people were killed because they wanted to vote, and the white people decided to run them out of Ocoee and kill them and burn their homes and stuff. And it was just a really horrible night. And I know like a lot of students, they don't know about that, even though we're literally in Ocoee.
Now, the overwhelming feeling in this video is painting conservatives as this racist group of people who are trying to keep the true African American history from being taught in Florida schools. So I did some digging, and what I found is shocking. Now, this is an article written by the Ku Klux Klan in 1920. "We shall always enjoy white supremacy in this country, and he who interferes must face consequences." Now, we're living in a time in our history where the Democrats are trying to use racism to paint conservatives as racists trying to keep it alive. But this article and this whole story says exactly the opposite. My first thought was immediately to look up who the Florida legislature was at that time in 1920. And this is what I found. There were two senators, Park Trammell and Duncan Fletcher, both Democrats. There were four House of Representatives, Herbert Drain, Frank Clark, John Smithwick, and William Sears, all Democrats. Now, the whole reason that this fateful day took place in 1920 was because although African Americans had the right to vote, they were strongly urged not to for fear that they would change the political landscape in that area at that time, which was completely run by Democrats. Now, some of this Florida legislature was avowed white supremacists, such as William Sears here, or Frank Clark, who's a strong advocate for segregation, who gave this speech: "This is our country, as it was the country of our fathers, the country of the white man, not the home of the mongrel. It will always be the white man's country. If the black man and the yellow man each desire to remain with us, occupying the sphere in life for which God Almighty intended each, let them do so. If not content with that, then let them go elsewhere." Now, as I mentioned earlier, at that time in Orange County and the rest of Florida, the political landscape was dominated by Southern white Democrats, or Dixiecrats, since the end of Reconstruction. In the weeks leading up to the election in 1920, African Americans had registered to vote in record numbers. At the same time, the Ku Klux Klan had established many new chapters since 1915. Now, 3 weeks before that election, they threatened the African American community that not one of them would be able to vote. However, at that time, there was a judge, Judge John Moses Chaney, a Republican. He was running for the United States Senate from Florida. He participated actively in the campaign to register African Americans to vote in Florida. As a lawyer, he had represented many African Americans during the segregation era. Two men, Mose Norman and July Perry, both prosperous African American landowners in Ocoee, led the local voter registration efforts in Orange County. But Ku Klux Klan members marched through the streets because African Americans supported the Republican Party. The Ku Klux Klan threatened Judge Cheney prior to the election. Now, when Election Day came, African Americans were violently pushed away from the polls that day, and a white mob grew and paraded up and down the street, becoming more angry and unmanageable. The rest of the African Americans just gave up trying to vote and left the polling place. The angry white mob stormed July's home, where he and Norman were safe inside, and demanded to come out and surrender. It did not go quietly, and there were casualties, both white and black. However, Norman did escape, never to be found. July Perry had some injuries. He was treated at a hospital and then later lynched in the town. Then a mob of 200 white men burned the African American portion of town down, and who didn't burn in the fire, they chased out of town, making that now a sundown town. This is an absolute tragedy in American history, and it absolutely should be taught, and it is. But what bothers me is that MSNBC is trying to depict that conservatives are the racists, and that they wouldn't want this to be taught. But if they really wanted to teach true history, then they would not be hiding the fact this entire tragedy was led by the Democratic Party. So who's really not telling the true history? White supremacy resided in the Democratic Party. Most Ku Klux Klan members were Democrats. Yet here we are in 2023. The Democrats have been using African Americans against themselves, using this idea of racism and trying to paint that 2023 is just as racist as it was in 1920. It's time to stop allowing them to perpetuate this lie. And I'm not denying that there are not still racist people in this world. But let's stop denying the history of how it all started. There's a famous old Lyndon Johnson quote from 1964 where he says, "We may have lost the South for a generation. I'll have those N-words voting Democrat for 200 years. If you'd like to research more, look up the Ocoee Massacre. Thank you. And if you like this content, don't forget to like and subscribe.